Hey everybody, this is Destiny with Neurodivergknit. I'm at my friend's house in Burnaby house sitting, and I thought this would be a wonderful time to get into my company, who I am, and what I do. So, my name is Destiny. I use they, them pronouns, and I have been knitting for about 14 years. I'm 29 now. I've been knitting for about 15 years. I started when I was 14, and I'm about 29 now. I'm really excited to bring free knitting classes to the Vancouver and Lower Mainland. Why I do this is because when I had time in the psych ward, everyone asked me how to knit. They saw me knitting and they wanted to know. I realized that knitting was the one thing keeping me sane when I was having really traumatic events. I would knit to calm my mind. It made me feel ease. It made my anxiety lessen. It made my depression not seem so bad. And it really helped me focus on what people were saying to me. So I came up with Neurodivergknit. I have ADHD. Neurodivergencies are a huge part of the process here at Neurodivergknit. I understand everybody learns at different rates, so I want to meet you where you're at. And what that means is if you're having a really hard time knitting, maybe I'll teach you how to finger knit. Maybe I'll teach you how to arm knit. I just want to get you into the practice of knitting, whether it's through a machine, a loom, or two needles and your hands. I want to get you knitting. Why? I feel like there's a huge correlation between the loss of handicrafts like knitting, crochet, macrame, sewing, etc., and anxiety and depression. I think when we lose our creativity, whether we think of ourselves as creative or not, we lose a huge part of who we are as people. We lose kind of that joie de vivre, that joy for life. And so I want to get people that joy again. Now, I don't want to say that it's sunshine and roses all the time, and I don't believe in toxic positivity, but I do believe that we can have better coping mechanisms like knitting to help us get through those not so good times. Because when I forced myself to knit, at least I did something that day. And then I can look at it and go, that's progress. Because I used to not be able to get out of bed. I struggled with anxiety and depression for a really long time, and I'm at a point in my life where I feel like I can give back. So Neurodivergknit is my baby. I'm looking into getting it into a nonprofit. I want to bring knitting classes to recovery houses, to halfway homes, to homeless shelters, to women's relief homes. I want to bring it to mental health centers. I want to bring it to the Aboriginal youth, kind of as a way to say, hey, I see you. I see that you're going through a lot, and let me give you some tools to help you go through a lot. Because the thing is, if you're homeless and you're cold, if you're knitting, I find that you can be inside for a lot longer if you're doing something. If you're just sitting there on your phone, sometimes establishments will ask you to leave, but if you have knitting with you, they usually are pretty kind. At least they were for me when I was, kind of wandering the streets a bit when I was a teenager because I didn't really have a safe home to go to. So I bring my knitting with me everywhere. I bring it to the doctor's office, I bring it on the train, I bring it on the bus. I don't necessarily knit on the train and the bus, but I knit while I wait for the train and the bus a lot of the time. And if I don't have Ethel, my granny wagon, because I take transit everywhere, even though I can drive, to make sure that the places I teach at are accessible for those with mobility aids. What else can I tell you about me and my company? I have a lot of goals and thoughts for this. I really want to make this a really cohesive, community-minded project. Community is the first thing. When you are in a class with me, I call you my classmates versus me calling you my students. The reason why is I'm learning as much from you as you're learning from me. Every time I teach, I learn a different way to teach and a different way to approach teaching. I don't believe in hierarchy, so even though I may be the instructor or I may be running the class, you have every right to give me feedback. You can tell me how the class is going. You can show me a different way that you find makes more sense to you. We can make the lesson plan as cued to you as humanly possible. I want to meet you where you're at. With knitting, there's many types of knitting. There is your traditional knitting, which comes in continental and continental and European style or German style knitting. I'm not going to get into the differences of them, but I teach continental. I also teach a 2-needle cast on because I feel like that gives you the base on how to do the knit stitches. Super simple. To me, if it's not to you, that's okay. We all make mistakes in the beginning. I also teach finger knitting, where you knit with your fingers. So you knit with these 4 fingers and then you use your other hand to create stitches. And I teach you how to knit with your arm. So you use your arm as your needle and then you use your hands to create the stitches. It's really fun, and there's lots of ways you can knit. There's loom knitting, which is pegs on usually circle or a rectangle piece of material. There's a hole in the middle and you use a pick and you pull the stitches over. So it gives you this wonderful knit stitch. There's machine knitting, which got really popular on TikTok. You can get a lot of machines for a little bit of money. Most of my stuff is donated to me. I haven't had any machine knits donated to me. Machine knitting does come at a bit of a startup cost, so keep that in mind if you want a machine knit. I'm not as familiar with machine knitting, a traditional machine knit, but I do know how to do the circular one with the turn. What else can I say? I know how to circular knit. I know how to double pointed knit, which is double pointed needles. That's also a type of circular knitting. I know how to do cables. I can help you do lace. I'm not the best with lace because it is repetitive patterns, but you have to remember a lot of stuff within the pattern. And then there's other types of knitting, like knitting garter stitch, stock knit stitch, rib stitches. I can get you going with the basics and then give you enough tools to move on to things like intarsia, which is color blocking. So I want to give you all the tools that you can to make the things you want. I don't teach how to read patterns. The reason being, it takes a lot of time in class, and every pattern usually gives you a little bit of a rundown on how to do stitches. I don't mind teaching you how to read a pattern or do stitches, but that's something that would do one-on-one. It's not something that really works in a classroom setting. As well as I want to teach you how to make custom pieces. So what my patterns usually rely on are measuring tapes, the kind that you would use to measure your waist, not measuring wood. You want like a thin, flexible measuring tape. And then I teach people how to make swatches. So a swatch will tell you what your knits are per inch and how long, you can get an idea of how long it takes you to make that swatch. So a swatch, I usually do a 20 by 20. So I make a square and then I see how many stitches are in 1 inch and how many stitches are in the entirety of the width and the length. And then I can go from there and I can figure out how to do a pattern based on what needles and yarn I'm using. It sounds a little complicated, but trust me, it's a lot easier. I wish I learned how to do that before I got into reading patterns. I would have made a whole bunch more things that I would have enjoyed a lot more, and my clothing would have fit better because I would have known what I was looking for. Now, most patterns do call for you to make a swatch, but the problem is they don't really tell you what to do with that swatch and how to adjust the pattern. As well as a lot of patterns, they'll test for one size and they don't test for other sizes. So let's say you're a medium, they'll test for the medium size, make sure that looks good. But if you're a 5XL, they won't actually test to see how that pattern looks on a 5XL. And I feel like that's a really big discrepancy in patterns because the darting might be in the wrong place and then you spend all that money and all that work to have something that you're not happy with. And it's not you, it's the pattern. So with that being said, let's get knitting. Join me at Neurodivergknit and we'll knit for some mental wellness. Bye for now.